In his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Manly P. Hall talks about Manichaeism, a dualistic system of Persian origin which taught that good and evil were forever contending for universal supremacy. In Manichaeism, Christ is conceived to be the principle of redeeming good in contradiction to the man Jesus, who is viewed as an evil personality. Manichaeism taught an elaborate dualistic cosmology describing the struggle between a good, spiritual world of light and an evil, material world of darkness. Through an ongoing process that takes place in human history, light is gradually removed from the world of matter and returned to the world of light, whence it came. Its beliefs were based on local Mesopotamian religious movements and Gnosticism. It revered Mani as the final prophet after Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus, and this is opposed to Islamic teaching. Mani or Mani would compose his own works, including 7 books that we know of. Mani would create his own script, known as the Manichaean alphabet. This was used in the Manichaean works written within the Sasanian Empire. While Manichaeism was spreading, existing religions such as Zoroastrianism were still popular, and it says here Christianity, but I'm sure it means the Roman Catholic version of Christianity, was gaining social and political influence. Although having fewer adherents, Manichaeism won the support of many high-ranking political figures. With the assistance of the Sasanian Empire, Mani began missionary expeditions. After failing to win the favor of the next generation of the Persian royalty and incurring the disapproval of the Zoroastrian clergy, Mani is reported to have died in prison awaiting execution by the Persian Emperor Bahram I, or the First. The date of his death is estimated at 276 to 277. Mani believed that the teachings of Buddha, Zoroaster, and Jesus were incomplete, and that his revelations were for the entire world, calling his teachings the religion of light. Mani received revelations when he was 12 and 24, and became dissatisfied with the sect he was born into. He began preaching at an early age, and was possibly influenced by contemporary Babylonian Aramaic movements such as Manichaeism and Aramaic translations of the Jewish apocalyptic writings similar to those found of Qumran, such as the Book of Enoch literature and the Syriac dualistic Gnostic writer Bardaisan. He received a revelation as a youth from a spirit, whom he would later call his twin, from which is also derived the name of Thomas the Apostle, the twin, and in Greek, spouse partner. His double, his protective angel, or divine self. It taught him truth that he developed into a religion. His divine twin or true self brought Mani to self-realization. He claimed to be the paraclete of truth as promised by Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus and Manichaeism possess 3 separate identities: Jesus the Luminous, Jesus the Messiah, and Jesus Patibulus, the suffering Jesus. As Jesus the Luminous, his primary role was as supreme revealer and guide, and it was he who woke Adam from his slumber and revealed to him the divine origins of his soul and its painful captivity by the body and mixture with matter. Number 2, Jesus the Messiah, was a historical being who was the prophet of the Jews and the forerunner of Mani. However, the Manichaeans believed he was wholly divine and that he never experienced human birth, as the physical reality surrounding the notions of his conception and his birth filled the Manichaeans with horror. However, the Christian doctrine of virgin birth was also regarded as obscene. Since Jesus the Messiah was the light of the world, where was this light, they reasoned, when Jesus was in the womb of the Virgin? Jesus the Messiah, they believed, was truly born only at his baptism, as it was only on that occasion that the Father openly acknowledged his sonship. The suffering, death, and resurrection of this Jesus were in appearance only as they had no salvific value, but were an exemplum of the suffering and eventual deliverance of the human soul and prefiguration of Mani's own martyrdom. Basically meaning that there was no salvation from that Jesus dying. It was just more to exemplify the suffering and eventual deliverance of the human soul and the prefiguration of Mani's own martyrdom. Very interesting. And number 3, Jesus, the suffering Jesus. The pain suffered by the imprisoned light particles in the whole of the visible universe, on the other hand, was real and imminent. This was symbolized by the mystic placing of the cross, whereby the wounds of the passion of our souls are set forth. On this mystical cross of light was suspended the suffering Jesus, Jesus Patibulus, who was the life and the salvation of man. This Mystica Crucifixio was present in every tree, herb, fruit, vegetable, and even stones and the soil. This constant and universal suffering of the captive soul is exquisitely expressed in one of the Coptic Manichaean palms. Mani declared himself an apostle of Jesus Christ, and Manichaean tradition notes that Mani was the reincarnation of Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, and Jesus. Come to find out, Mani is to be the seal of the prophets, something that the Islamic traditions ascribe to Muhammad. Many scriptures would relate to the Book of Enoch, the second Book of Enoch, and a forgotten section of the Book of Enoch called the Book of Giants especially. This book was quoted directly and expanded on by Mani, becoming one of the original 6 writings of the church. Scattered fragments of the Book of Giants was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Judean desert. It would be important to read the Book of Enoch if you really truly wanted to understand Manichaeism, because they use this book a lot. This literature describes the being that the prophets saw in their ascent to heaven as a king who sits on a throne at the highest of the heavens. In the Manichaean description, this being, the great king of honor, becomes a deity who guards the entrance to the world of light, placed at the 7th of 10 heavens. Buddhist influences were significant in the formation of Mani's religious thought. He also believed in the transmigration of souls. The Manichaeans preserved many apocryphal Christian works, such as the Acts of Thomas, that would otherwise have been lost. It's interesting to know, during the Song dynasty, the Manichaeans in China were derogatorily referred by the Chinese as abstain from meat and worship demons. People that abstain from meat and worship demons. The Manichaeans worshipped the white Buddha, and their leader wore a violet headgear, while the followers wore white costumes. All governments were suppressive against Manichaeism and its followers, and the religion was even banned by the Ming dynasty in 1370. Manichaeism spread with extraordinary speed through both the East and the West. It reached Rome through the apostle Pasatik by 280, who was also in Egypt in 244 and 251. It was flourishing in the Fayum in 290. In 291, persecution arose in the Sasanian Empire with the murder of the apostle Sisin by the Emperor Bahram II and the slaughter of many Manichaeans. Then in 302, the first official reaction and legislation against Manichaeanism from the Roman state to Manichaeanism was issued under Diocletian. The Manichaeans were ordered to be burned along with their writings, and along with capital punishment, their goods to be forfeited to the imperial treasury. Any person who holds public office or any rank or superior social status will have their estates confiscated and the offenders sent to the quarry or the mines. In 382, the emperor issued a series of edicts to suppress Manichaeism and punish its followers. And it didn't help that Augustine of Hippo converted to Christianity, even though Manichaeism is a form of Christianity. It says on Wikipedia that he converted to Christianity, the Catholic form, in the year 387. This was shortly after the Roman Emperor Theodosius I had issued a decree of death for all Manichaean monks in 382, and shortly before he declared Christianity to be the only legitimate religion for the Roman Empire in 391. Hippo would state that he saw their beliefs that the knowledge was the key to salvation as too passive and not able to affect any change in one's life. So it states here that Manichaeism was all about knowledge. He would go on to state, I still thought that it was not we who sin, but some other nature that sins within us. It flattered my pride to think that I incurred no guilt, and when I did wrong, not to confess it. I preferred to excuse myself and blame this unknown thing which was in me, but not part of me. The truth, of course, was that it was all my own self and my own impiety, and it had divided me against myself. My sin was all the more incurable because I did not think myself a sinner. So he says it in an interesting way. It's more so he believes the darkness comes from his own personality rather than being affected by some sort of stimuli, you could say. This idea of, is the core of man a good being, or is the core of man an evil being, comes back around. But it always seems to be that the one side believes that everyone's evil on the inside and everyone should just admit it. But then the other side believes that everyone is good and everyone should just admit that. So it's interesting. Scholars would suggest that Manichaean ways of thinking influenced the development of some of Augustine's ideas, such as the nature of good and evil, the idea of hell, the separation of groups into elect, hearers, and sinners, and the hostility to the flesh and sexual activity, and his dualistic theology. This put him at conflict with a British monk named Pelagius, whose theology, being less influenced by the Latin Church, was non-dualistic and one that saw the created order, and mankind in particular, as having a divine core rather than a darkness at its core. The Manichaeans influenced many other groups like the Cathars and showed that a satanic demiurge influenced the material world. He would go on to influence people like Priscillian, who would talk about the distinction between flesh and spirit, darkness and light, Moses and Christ, and the prince of this world and Christ. Priscillians would do things at home, such as prayer, fast, meditate, or they would even go to the mountains instead of attending church during Lent. Let's be reminded at the beginning, Manly P. Hall stated that there is a difference between Jesus and Christ, Christ being the Redeemer and Jesus being the evil personality.